of course we have Ruth, but as you know, Ruth essentially, her maybe one of her most positive attributes is that she simply remained faithful to her mother-in-law. Okay? So in that respect, it wasn't any type of powerful thing or anything like that. That again, very nice story. All right. Likewise with women, you had segregation of the temple. This was only after the second temple. So after the second temple was completed, women were segregated from men. Okay, they had to go out to the woman's court, but that was outside the temple. Women could pray, and they could study the Torah, but they could not engage in any administration. Okay? And they couldn't become scholars of the Torah. All right. Again, the predominant family structure was patriarchal. All right, so how far did that extend? It extended a long way. All right? A wife is a man's possession. And is named along with ox, other cattle, slave as man's possession. Okay? The father could sell a daughter into slavery or prostitution. Now, I'm telling you all this to give you an idea of why Judith is such a shock to Jews, okay? Why including this in the Bible could have been such a big thing. Now, the selling into slavery or prostitution was later prohibited, but initially it was something that a man could do. He could sell his daughters, okay? One wife was the law as nomads, but men could have as many concubines as they could afford. In other words, they had to be able to care for them, feed them, house them, all of that. I'll get to the whole concubine thing in a minute here. Polygamy, however, was legalized after they settled in Canaan. So while they were nomads, it was one wife. Once they settled in Canaan, because you know that David had more than one wife, Solomon is purported to have 500 wives, okay? After they settled in Canaan, polygamy was allowed, and then again, it was not allowed later. Okay? Women do not own property.
Couple of questions.
Sure.
Before you go too much farther, but you mentioned earlier that women in the old temple, is it just that we don't know if women were segregated into a separate women's court?
We don't know that in the old temple, but as far as we know, no, there was no prohibition. There didn't seem to be a prohibition.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then my other comment was this, Judith, I shouldn't jump ahead, but maybe Judith had her property sort of in a trust because she was a widow, and then that would have to go to an heir. Because Judith had property.
All inheritance eventually goes to the eldest son. Yeah. Yeah.
Of someone. If she doesn't have an oldest son, then a distant relative.
Yeah, it goes to a male, okay? Right, if there were no sons, daughters could inherit, but then they had to marry somebody in the clan so that the clan being accepted them, so that the property stayed in the family, yeah. All right, so we remember that the next son taking the widow of a brother was part of keeping property in the family as well. If the oldest brother dies, and the story of Ruth really followed that pattern. But then it was Boaz who marries Ruth, and he gets a son, and you just keep it in the family. Okay? Hebrew men enjoyed complete sexual freedom. So, for instance, there's the Old Testament, I think, Genesis story of Judah having a prostitute. He found a prostitute and he left his signet with her as collateral or something, and it was actually his daughter-in-law, and there's no moral distaste for the fact that he was with a prostitute. It just was not considered necessarily a bad thing. Okay? Concubines are acceptable.
What exactly is a concubine?
It's a person that you have sex with. So, let me give you, I will give you, this is not the Jewish description, but this is a Greek description, but it gives you an idea of concubines, wives, and prostitutes. So, in the Greek culture, prostitutes are for pleasure. Concubines are for what's called daily needs. Wives are for children. So, complete sexual freedom. So, like I say, if you look in the Old Testament, there are many times when someone will take a prostitute and there's absolutely no judgment made whatsoever. Okay? Concubines were simply accepted, as long as you could afford them, feed them, house them. Okay? So, essentially, complete sexual freedom.
This is after the 10 Commandments, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
I already know the question. Then what the heck is adultery, right? I asked the same question. So adultery appears to be being both sexually and emotionally unfaithful to your spouse. Now, a woman, all she has to do is lay with another man, and that's adultery. It appears that there's a higher bar to call a man an adulterer. Remember, it's a patriarchal society. But I've asked the same question: what is adultery?
What do you suppose they did with, obviously, if they had concubines, there was outside the marriage children, probably.
Right.
And I wonder if those children, if that was their father, or they were just of out, or, I don't know?
They were concubines, so they were not wives,
Yeah.
which
So
means
these
that
children aren't family, I guess.
apparently, yeah.
So no inheritance?
No.
Wonder what happened to all those children?
Yeah, or, you know, and I don't know, because I don't know exactly what a concubine, except I don't understand a concubine for daily needs from the Greek tradition. But, yeah, it's just one of those weird things. And yeah, it makes you ask the question, what is adultery?
So how long into Jewish history does this go?
Not to today, as far as I know.
Only in the good old days.
Yeah, those were the good old days when we had complete sexual freedom and, women were possessions anyway, so. Yeah.
So this is all happening in the time of the strict observance of the law.
Mhm.
And so none of this was written into the law of Moses.
Prohibitions were not written into the law of Moses, that's correct.
So it kind of makes you wonder if the Jewish tradition changed, or if Christianity changed the Jewish tradition, kind of.
No, the Jewish tradition would have changed over time,
So.
yeah. So eventually polygamy was, no longer polygamy. I assume that concubines also became, forbidden. And at some point prostitution became forbidden, although neither Christians nor Jews
Yeah.
wholeheartedly, although we still have prostitution in the world, so, yeah. Okay, but at this time, these are the types of things that were going on. A husband or a wife could be killed for adultery. It was capital punishment if you had adultery, okay? A wife had very little protection against a false accusation. So Numbers 5, 11 through 31, this discusses a woman accused of adultery. In other words, if you did not witness it, how do you determine that a woman committed adultery? Okay, so 11 through 31 gives you the whole process. Okay, and it's quite an ordeal. There is not, however, an ordeal for a man that is similar to the ordeal for the woman. Okay, all right. So we also know of the ideal wife in Proverbs, a very positive image of a wife. But as I have often said, that wife is Superwoman. Okay? But it does give the woman, the description anyway, talks about a woman who has power that women normally didn't have in the family. Okay, making all kinds of business deals, all this type of stuff. Divorce is obtainable by a man, never a woman. So there is this scene in Fiddler on the Roof. You've all seen Fiddler on the Roof, right? Yeah. And it's a scene that I think most people just kind of gloss over. But you have a rabbi and some elders are in this room, and somebody walks in on this conversation. But the rabbi is saying, and just for burning his supper, he can divorce her, and he slams the book shut. Okay? So, you kind of give you an idea of how important it was to also be a good cook if you were. All right. Jewish law forced a rapist to marry the woman he raped. And in this case, he cannot divorce her. Okay? Women being barren. So we think that barren means they can't conceive. It means they can't conceive a son. They could have daughters. But it's important to understand this because girls just weren't that important. Okay? They couldn't do heavy work on farms. They couldn't do heavy work, period. Okay? So the daughter simply was not as welcome as the son was.
That's still the same in some parts of the world now, right? India or China?
Oh,
That
sure.
area,
There are
yeah.
lots of cultures where women simply have no rights. Yeah, yeah. Okay? Women, however, did contribute to the well-being of the family. So, they could milk cattle and sheep. Okay? They could make yogurt and cheese. They could process animals' wool. You look at these and we'd say, yeah, those are typical women things, right? Okay? And they would plant, weed, and harvest. Okay, so those are things that women could and would do. All right. So that gives you an idea of women in the Old Testament. Again, in stark contrast to Judith. That's what we're going for here. Questions about women? All right. So there still is, especially among the most Orthodox Jews, there still is a very patriarchal idea of the family. Among Reformed Jews, not so much. Okay? So for instance, in the Orthodox tradition, the very Orthodox tradition, there is a bar mitzvah for men, but women cannot have a bat mitzvah. That's in the Reformed tradition you can, but not in the Orthodox tradition. So there's an old saying about women and men. Women are born Jewish, men are born wild animals, and it is the Torah that trains them to be Jewish. And the bar mitzvah is essentially that celebration of having had the wildness whipped out of you. So men are wild animals.
How
Right?
old are they usually for the bar mitzvah?
Huh? I'm
How
sorry?
old are they usually?
Usually about 13. 13, 14.
I don't think it's out of them by then.
Yeah, I
No,
think
no.
it's more wild than.
I was gonna say, aren't they just starting?
Well, and the whole thing is that a man, that's why a man has to be brought up on the Torah from a very young age. All pointing toward that time where he becomes a man. Okay? So, yeah. But, women are simply born Jewish, they don't have to go through that because they're not wild animals like men are.
And they can't learn the Torah either, or can they?
They don't need to. They can study it, but they can't be a scholar of it.
Okay.
Yeah. So they can't claim to know this well enough to say write scholarly articles. At least not really till the 20th century.
Did you ever watch the movie Yentl?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
Yes. And remember
That's
that
what
she
it is,
had
yeah.
to look like she was a man.
Right, right.
Right, exactly, exactly. All right, so into this morass, we have Judith. So let's talk more about her. So the story allows a woman to step out of her role as a woman in Jewish society. Okay? Stepped out of her role as a woman in Jewish society. The story actually, as we have said, contains details of 5 centuries of history. That's why we say it's an historical novel. And they're simply mixed together. But well done. Okay? Because it really does read as a great novel. You read the whole thing through. It's just great. Okay? So Nineveh and the Assyrian capital were destroyed in the 7th century. Nebuchadnezzar was in the 6th century BC as Babylonian ruler. The second temple was not rebuilt until after the exiles returned in 539. Okay, and Holofernes and Bagoas, who appear in the campaign of Artaxerxes II in the 4th century. Okay, so we're spanning a number of centuries here. So at this time that Judith was written, Judith, Ruth, and Esther were all written about the same time. Okay, so you have these 3 great stories of women being all written about the same time. So these are women powerful in their own right, not because of their husband. All right? Women here in these stories are not to be treated as disposable chattel, or just as disposable. And that may have been one of the points of the stories. Show that women can be powerful in their own right. They were capable of being God's instruments, just like men are. Okay? In Judith's case, women were more capable than men. This is where some creative person who actually did a movie about this could put a lot of, dialogue in about, you cowardly men. Judith essentially chastising men for being a bunch of cowards and then just taking this all on her own. Okay? She was clearly even more capable than men were. Okay? So, Judith, what are the purposes? Number one, the author may have tried to show Judith as the model Jewess with total devotion to God. Number two, as that model Jewess, she is totally devoted to the Mosaic law. In the face of Assyrian aggression. Number three, it may show that women need to be independent to uphold the law that men are not upholding. So, if you remember correctly, we had lots of kings in both the northern kingdom and southern kingdom. And if you remember correctly, in our list, most of them were bad kings. But they were all men. Okay? No queens. Alright? So this may be pointing to women having to uphold the law in ways that men were not doing it. Women, in this case, can be creative, courageous enough to take drastic action. Including transfixing a warrior's head to the ground, cutting it off, and then bringing it back to the camp to show the men that he's dead, nothing to be afraid of. Okay? And it is the woman's right to practice deception if necessary. Which she did.
So you mean lie, breaking the command?
Well, the command was
Right,
to bear
but-
false witness, I mean, that's maybe the open to interpretation.
Yeah, so deception, I mean, she had to deceive, Holofernes, right?
And then there's thou shalt not kill.
Right,
Is it
they
there?
were at wars,
There's
yeah.
always
There's always a way around it.
Yeah, in order to save the Jewish people, you had to kill, and in order to kill, you had to practice deception.
I get that,
Don't
survival.
lie, it's just practice deception.
You think that would go now?
It depends upon what the situation was. I think, no, really, it would depend upon what the situation is. I think it depends upon the situation, the context at any time. But, yeah, she can practice deception in order to save the Jewish people, and quite frankly, to show men that they were power. All right, so why is it excluded from the Jewish canon? Well, you've got certainly a woman who is stepping out of what a woman normally does. That's one thing. But also, if you look at chapter 15, verse 9, which says, "You are the glory of Jerusalem, the great boast of Israel, the great pride of our nation." That could have been reason enough for rabbis to not accept it, to have elevated a woman to that level. Could have been. Or it was just something additional that allowed them to say, yeah, this isn't going over here. Okay? So, you have three big episodes in this particular story. First one is Nebuchadnezzar's war. I'm just going to put N-E-B, Neb's war. All right? Townspeople here think God has abandoned them. And so you have the leading citizen, Uzziah, suggests prayer, which is not a bad thing, but you got this huge army there. He was essentially playing for time. All right? The second major episode is Judith and the elders. Okay, and here you have Judith confronting the leaders and tells them their plan won't work. So she confronts the leaders, assails their plan. Again, a woman stepping out of her so-called place and stepping up. Then she puts a secret plan into action, deception. Deception of her own people in this case. She seduces Holofernes, cuts off his head. Okay, which takes us to the third scene, or the third episode, and we'll just call that aftermath. So, Judith returns with Holofernes' head. The head hangs outside the wall of the city. their troops panic and become easy prey for the Jewish army. So the Assyrian troops. And finally, Judith saves her people. She is a national heroine. All right, that's Judith. Heck of a woman. Questions, comments?
I see her as a long line of very strong Jewish women. I just don't think she's an exception, because we had Deborah as an example, and then this woman named Jael, the 10th peg assassin. And even in the book of Ruth, although Ruth seems to be a bit of a pawn, Naomi was really a strong and very good mother-in-law, maneuvering her daughter-in-law into a place where the inheritance is going to be assured, and her daughter and herself will be well taken care of. I just think, and then there's the last woman that we read about, Esther. There's just, it just seems to me that the people in this faith group have a lot of very strong, active women, and they're celebrated.
Yes.
So I don't see, I mean, it's true, they must live with a lot of difficulty.
So the real question
There's
becomes,
purpose to this.
right, the real question becomes, are they celebrated in the way? So this is an apocryphal book. So they're not celebrated in the sense that these are books that are in the canon of the Bible. They're good stories, but they're apocryphal books. So,
Except in the Catholic Bible.
right, I'm talking about the
And I'm
Hebrew
very
tradition.
glad we have them.
That's correct, that's correct. Oh, I agree, and I'm glad we do too. So we're talking here about the Hebrew Bible,
That's true.
okay? And much of that is due to the place of women in the society. You know, it's, how do we necessarily celebrate? Ruth probably wouldn't have been so difficult. Even Esther, to some extent, wouldn't have been difficult. It's interesting that, you know, yeah, it's just really interesting about Esther.
Because she was a wife and she had Mordecai, who was sort of
Correct.
calling the shots.
But they didn't know she was a Jew, at least initially. But Judith so steps out of the role of woman. I mean, you didn't have Deborah going out and fighting and cutting off somebody's head, right? Although she was certainly able to do it, yeah. But this is the difficulty of making any of these books canonical in the Hebrew tradition. Okay? It doesn't work. Yeah, it just doesn't work for me. So, yeah. Other questions? All right.